Tom lived on a quiet ranch at the edge of town. He loved the open space, the fresh air, and the sound of his animals moving around in the morning. His ranch was not huge, but it was enough for him. He had a barn with a few horses, some chickens, and a small field where he grew vegetables. Life was simple and he enjoyed it. For many years his bills were steady. He knew exactly how much water he used, how much food the animals needed, and how much electricity he spent each month. Nothing ever changed too much, and that was what Tom liked. But one summer something strange began to happen. When Tom opened his electricity bill, he frowned. The numbers on the page made no sense. The total was almost double the usual amount. At first he thought maybe the company made a mistake. It had happened to people before. He decided not to worry and paid the bill, thinking next month would go back to normal. The next month came and Tom opened the envelope with a small smile, expecting things to be fixed. But his smile quickly disappeared. The bill was even higher than before. His stomach felt tight. Something was wrong. Tom walked around his ranch, checking every corner. He looked at the barn, the chicken coop, and the small storage shed. The lights were off. The machines were quiet. He unplugged the old water pump and even turned off a few tools he hardly used. After doing all that, he was sure the bills would drop. But the third month's bill arrived, and it was the biggest one yet. Tom sat at his wooden table, staring at the paper in disbelief. He ran his hand through his hair and whispered, "This is not possible." That evening, he walked outside and leaned on the fence. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It should have been a peaceful moment, but Tom could not relax. His eyes moved toward the house next door. Karen lived there. She was part of the neighborhood's HOA, and everyone knew her well. She was always telling people how they should cut their grass, paint their fences, or park their cars. Tom usually stayed out of her way. He liked peace and did not care for arguments. But something about her house caught his eye. Every window was bright. Lights glowed in every room, and her backyard fountain sparkled as the water pump ran all night. Even her garage looked like it was always powered, with a freezer humming and bright lamps shining. Tom narrowed his eyes. He thought about his own dark barn and his careful use of electricity. Why was her house so bright all the time? The thought came slowly at first, and Tom tried to push it away. He told himself he was only being suspicious. But when he looked again, something strange stood out. Near the fence line, hidden behind tall grass, a small wire seemed out of place. It ran from the direction of his power meter and disappeared into the bushes near Karen's side of the property. Tom felt a chill. His heart began to beat faster. Could it really be true? Could someone be using his electricity? He decided not to rush. Instead, he took a flashlight and followed the wire the next day. He waited until the sun was up so that no one would think he was sneaking around at night. Slowly, he moved along the fence, careful not to step on the wire. It stretched further and further until it slipped into a space behind Karen's garage wall. Tom stood still. His suspicion was now more than a thought. It was becoming real. He bent down and touched the wire. It was warm. Power was running through it. His chest tightened. He had found the reason his bills were climbing. Tom pulled out his old phone and took a few pictures. He knew if he went to Karen right away, she would deny it. She was sharp with words and had a strong voice. Many neighbors feared her arguments because she always made herself look innocent while blaming others. Tom was not going to give her that chance. That night, as he sat in his living room, he thought about what to do next. The ranch was quiet, but his mind was restless. He could not understand how someone could do something like this. Stealing electricity was not only unfair, it was dangerous too. What if the wire sparked and caused a fire? His barn, his animals, even his home could be at risk. Tom decided he needed to stay calm and collect more proof. He would not act in anger. He would act with patience. As he closed his eyes to sleep, he told himself one thing. The truth would come out, no matter how long it took. And so the next chapter of his ranch life had begun, not with peace, but with suspicion and the shadow of a secret waiting to be revealed. Tom woke early the next morning. The sun had not fully risen and the air was cool and fresh. Normally, he enjoyed mornings like this, walking around his ranch, feeding the chickens and brushing his horses. But today his mind was not calm. All he could think about was the wire he had found the day before. As he poured oats for the horses, he kept glancing toward the fence that divided his land from Karen's property. Her house stood tall and bright even in the early hours. A porch light still burned, and he could hear the faint hum of machines coming from her garage. Tom frowned. Most people turned off their lights at night, but not Karen. By the time he finished his chores, the sky had turned blue, and more sounds of the neighborhood began to rise. Cars started, dogs barked, and sprinklers clicked on. Tom leaned on the fence watching as Karen stepped outside. She wore a neat outfit, as if she were going to a meeting, though it was only morning. She held a clipboard in her hand, just like always. She walked down the street, stopping at each house. Tom knew this routine. Karen liked to inspect the neighborhood. She was part of the HOA, and she never missed a chance to point out rules or demand changes. Last month, she had told one family to repaint their mailbox because the color looked too faded. Another time, she scolded an older man for leaving his trash bin out one day too long. Tom stayed quiet, hoping she would not notice him, but Karen's eyes were sharp and soon she spotted him standing by his fence. "Good morning, Tom," she called, her voice cheerful but heavy with false sweetness. "I hope you are keeping your ranch in good order." Tom forced a smile. "Morning. Everything is fine here." Karen adjusted the clipboard under her arm. "I hope so. You know, the HOA is very strict about barn appearances, and weeds near the road must be trimmed every week. I will be checking soon." Tom nodded but said nothing more. He had no desire to argue with her. As she turned and walked back to her property, he noticed something unusual again. Near the side of her garage, a section of the bushes looked freshly trimmed, almost as if she had been hiding something behind them and wanted it clear. Tom's heart raced. That was where the wire disappeared yesterday. Later that afternoon, Tom sat at his table with a notebook. He decided he needed to keep a record. On one page, he wrote down the date, the time, and what he had seen. Karen's light staying on at night, the sound of her machines, the trimmed bushes near the garage, and of course, the hidden wire. He also kept the pictures safe in his phone. He told himself not to rush. If he acted too soon, she would deny everything. If he waited and collected enough evidence, no one could argue against him. Over the next few days, Tom paid close attention. Each night when he turned off the barn lights and went inside, he looked toward Karen's house. Every room glowed as if she were running a small hotel. The fountain in her backyard never stopped, sending water up and down with a constant buzz of electricity. Sometimes, even at midnight, her garage door would open, and more lights would flood the street. Tom could not help but shake his head. It was no wonder his bills were so high. She was living with endless power, and he was paying for it. One evening, as he was locking the barn, he heard voices near the fence. He paused and listened carefully. Karen was speaking loudly to another neighbor, Mrs. Miller. "Honestly," Karen said, "I don't know how some people manage their money. They act like their bills are too high, but maybe they just waste energy. People need to take responsibility." Tom clenched his fists. The word stung because he knew she was talking about him. He had mentioned his high bills to Mrs. Miller once, and clearly Karen had twisted the story. Mrs. Miller gave a polite laugh, but Tom could tell she was uncomfortable. She quickly ended the conversation and went back inside her house. Karen, however, stayed outside, adjusting the lights on her porch and humming to herself. That night, Tom sat in his chair and thought hard. He did not like conflict, but he could no longer ignore what was happening. His money, his ranch, and even his peace of mind were being stolen. He decided his next step would be to carefully check the meter. If the numbers were running too high even when his machines were off, then he would have even stronger proof. He went outside with a flashlight and stood by the meter. It spun quickly, faster than it ever should when his barn was dark and his tools were unplugged. Tom sighed. The evidence was clear, but still he told himself to wait a little longer. He wanted the truth to be so strong that even Karen could not escape it. As he went back inside, Tom looked once more toward her house. The lights shone like a beacon in the night, bright and careless. He whispered quietly to himself, "Your secrets will not stay hidden forever, Karen." And deep in his heart, he knew the time to confront her was coming soon. The next few days passed slowly for Tom. He kept up with his ranch work, but his mind was always on the strange wire. Each time he fed the horses or carried water for the chickens, his eyes drifted toward the fence. He wondered how long Karen had been stealing from him. Was it only a few months, or had she been doing it for years without him noticing? The thought made his stomach turn. One evening, after finishing his chores, Tom decided to take a closer look. The sun had gone down and the street was quiet. He carried a small flashlight and walked slowly toward the meter at the side of his ranch. The numbers spun quickly, just as they had before, even though every single light and machine on his property was turned off. Tom took another picture for his records. Then, with slow and careful steps, he followed the wire again. It was partly buried in the soil and partly hidden by grass. He crouched low and traced it along the fence line. His heart beat fast, but he kept moving until he reached the row of bushes between his ranch and Karen's garage. There, he saw it clearly. The wire disappeared straight into a small hole drilled into the side of Karen's garage wall. He placed his hand near it, and the faint vibration told him the current was flowing strong. Tom felt anger rise inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wanted to rip the wire out right there, but he knew that would only lead to shouting and arguments. Karen would accuse him of damaging her property. No, he thought, he needed to be smarter. Instead of touching the wire, he stepped back and took more pictures from different angles. He wanted proof that could not be denied. He even placed a small mark on the ground with a rock so he could show later where the line crossed into her land. The next morning, Tom returned to his normal routine, though inside he felt restless. As he worked, he noticed Karen outside in her yard. She was watering her flowers, humming as if life was perfect. Her fountain sparkled. Her air conditioners ran, and her porch lights still shone brightly even under the daylight sun. Tom studied her from a distance. She acted so confident, walking around as though she owned the entire neighborhood. She often waved at passing cars, but her smile never reached her eyes. Deep down, Tom knew she was hiding the truth behind that smile. Later that afternoon, Tom went to the hardware store in town. He bought a small notebook with a strong cover, a lock for his barn just in case, and new batteries for his flashlight. The shopkeeper, Mr. Harris, greeted him warmly. "How are things at the ranch, Tom?" Tom hesitated. He almost told Mr. Harris everything, but he decided against it. For now, it was better to keep things quiet until he had enough proof. He simply smiled and said, "Busy, but good." When he returned home, Tom started writing in his notebook again. He described the exact spot where the wire entered Karen's garage. He drew a rough sketch of the fence line, the bushes, and the meter. He wanted every detail written down in case someone doubted him later. That night, as the stars appeared in the sky, Tom sat on his porch. The sound of crickets filled the air. His ranch was dark and calm, but next door Karen's house glowed like a festival. The fountain bubbled, the garage lights blazed, and even a row of decorative lights along her roof twinkled. Tom shook his head. The difference between his home and hers was almost laughable. He lived carefully, saving every bit of electricity he could while she wasted power without a second thought. And the worst part was that she wasn't even paying for it. He was. The next day, Tom decided to test something. He turned off his main breaker switch for a short while, shutting down all power to his ranch. Then he stood by the meter. To his surprise, the numbers still moved, though more slowly than before. That confirmed it. Electricity was still flowing, but not into his home. It was flowing into hers. Tom felt a mix of relief and anger. He finally had undeniable proof. He pulled out his phone again and filmed the spinning meter while his ranch was completely shut down. His voice was calm as he explained what was happening in the video. He knew this evidence would be strong. No one could deny that power was being stolen when his entire ranch was off, and yet the meter still turned. That evening, Tom went for a walk around the neighborhood. He greeted Mrs. Miller, who was trimming her roses, and waved at Mr. Lewis, who was fixing his truck. Both neighbors smiled, but Tom noticed something. They glanced at Karen's house more than once. Her bright lights and constant noise were impossible to ignore. People were beginning to wonder, even if they didn't say it out loud. Tom returned to his porch, feeling a little more confident. He now had pictures, notes, and even a video. He was getting closer to the moment when he could confront Karen or take the matter to someone who would handle it properly. As he leaned back in his chair, he looked once more at the wire vanishing into her garage. He whispered to himself, "I will not let this go on much longer." The ranch around him was quiet, but inside Tom's heart, a storm was growing. He had found the secret connection, and soon the world would know about it too. The next morning began like any other. The sky was bright, the air fresh, and the ranch was full of quiet movement as Tom fed his animals. But inside his heart he felt heavy. For days he had been collecting proof of the stolen electricity, and now he could not stay silent anymore. The wire, the spinning meter, the video, and the endless lights at Karen's house, all of it pointed to the truth. Tom was not a man who liked trouble. He believed in living calmly, working hard, and letting others live their own lives. But this was different. Karen was stealing from him, and the bills were becoming harder to manage. He decided it was time to face her, even though he knew she would not make it easy. After finishing his chores, Tom walked to the fence and looked toward Karen's house. As always, her yard looked more like a showpiece than a home. The fountain sparkled. Porch lights were still on, though it was morning, and the faint buzz of machines could be heard from her garage. Soon enough, Karen stepped outside, holding her clipboard, dressed as neatly as if she were going to a meeting. She spotted Tom almost immediately. With her usual confident smile, she walked toward him. "Good morning, Tom," she said sweetly. "I hope your animals are not making too much noise for the neighborhood. You know the HOA rules are very clear about keeping things peaceful." Tom kept his voice calm. "Morning, Karen. I wanted to talk to you about something important." Her eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile stayed fixed. "Oh, and what might that be?" Tom took a deep breath. "My electricity bills have been unusually high these past few months. I checked everything in my ranch, and nothing explains the extra use. But I did find something that does." Karen tilted her head. "Are you suggesting it is somehow my concern? Maybe you should look more carefully at your own property." Tom's eyes stayed steady. "I already have. I found a wire running from my meter into your garage. I also have pictures and videos of it. The meter spins even when my ranch is completely shut off. That means power is being pulled into your home." For the first time, Karen's smile wavered. She quickly regained it, but her tone grew sharper. "That is a serious accusation, Tom. If you go around saying things like that, you might find yourself in trouble. The HOA does not tolerate false claims." Tom's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "This is not a false claim. I am not here to argue or shout. I just want you to know I am aware of what is happening. I gave you the chance to explain before I take this further." Karen's voice grew louder. "Excuse me? You think I would steal from you? That is ridiculous. Maybe your equipment is faulty. Maybe you don't know how to manage your ranch." She looked around as if hoping neighbors might hear her words. Tom remained steady. "My equipment is fine. I tested it. I shut down my entire ranch and the meter still moved. I filmed it. The wire behind your garage tells the rest of the story." Karen's cheeks turned red, but she tried to cover her frustration with more words. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about. You should be careful, Tom. Spreading lies can lead to serious consequences." Tom sighed. He could see she would not admit anything. He had hoped she might at least feel guilty and stop on her own, but instead she was trying to twist the truth. He gave her a final look. "I don't want arguments, Karen. I'm telling you what I know. You can either fix it yourself or I will bring in the sheriff. That's all I have to say." Then he turned and walked back toward his barn, leaving her standing by the fence. The rest of the day felt heavy. Tom tried to focus on his work, but he kept replaying the conversation in his mind. He knew Karen would not stop. She had no reason to change unless someone forced her to, and he also knew she would try to make him look like the bad one in front of the neighbors. Later in the afternoon, as he repaired a gate, Tom overheard Karen talking loudly near the street. She was speaking to Mr. Lewis and Mrs. Miller. "Some people don't know how to run their property," Karen said in a dramatic tone. "They blame others for their mistakes. Imagine accusing me of stealing electricity. Can you believe it?" Mrs. Miller looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but Karen pressed on, making herself sound like the victim. Tom watched from a distance, shaking his head. He had expected this. That night, Tom sat at his table and wrote in his notebook again. He added details of the confrontation, what she had said, and how she reacted. Then he looked at his phone, scrolling through the pictures and the video. The evidence was strong. He realized there was only one path left. Karen would never admit the truth, and the neighbors would believe her words before his unless he brought someone with authority into the matter. As he turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Tom made up his mind. Tomorrow he would drive into town and speak directly to the sheriff. The confrontation was over, but the real battle was only beginning. The morning sun rose over the hills, painting the sky in soft gold. Tom stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, staring across the fence at Karen's house. The memory of their confrontation still weighed heavily on his mind. She had denied everything, spoken loudly enough for neighbors to hear, and made herself look innocent. He had expected no less, but it still frustrated him. Her house was glowing as usual. porch light still burned, the fountain bubbled nonstop, and the steady hum of her air conditioners filled the quiet street. Tom shook his head. It was clear she was not going to stop on her own. After feeding his animals, Tom grabbed his notebook and his phone. He placed both in his truck and started the engine. Dust rose from the dirt road as he drove toward town. The sheriff's office was not far, but the drive gave him time to think. He knew Karen would fight back with words. She was clever, and she had a way of making herself sound like the victim. That was why he needed to be ready with proof strong enough to silence every excuse. When he arrived, Tom parked and stepped inside the small brick building. The sheriff, a tall man with steady eyes, was behind the desk sorting through papers. He looked up and gave Tom a nod. "Morning, Tom," the sheriff said. "What brings you here today?" Tom removed his hat and held it in his hands. "Morning, Sheriff. I wouldn't be here unless it was important. I've got a problem with my neighbor Karen, and I need your help." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, listening closely. "Go on." Tom placed his notebook on the desk and opened his phone. He explained everything, starting from the rising bills to discovering the wire, to the video of the spinning meter while his ranch was shut down. He even described the confrontation with Karen, where she denied everything and tried to twist the truth. The sheriff studied the pictures and watched the short video carefully. His brows furrowed as he leaned closer. "So this wire runs from your meter straight into her garage?" "Yes," Tom said firmly. "It's hidden behind her bushes, but it's there. The current flows directly into her property. She's been running all her machines on my account." The sheriff tapped his fingers on the desk. "That's theft. No doubt about it. And from what I can see, you've collected solid proof. You did the right thing coming here instead of taking matters into your own hands." A wave of relief washed over Tom. He had worried the sheriff might not take him seriously, but now he felt a little lighter. "What will happen now?" Tom asked. The sheriff stood and reached for his hat. "We'll handle it. This kind of behavior cannot continue. I'll come by this evening with my deputies. We'll check the connection ourselves right in front of her and the neighbors. If she denies it, then the evidence will speak louder than her words." Tom nodded, though his heart beat faster at the thought. Confronting Karen had been difficult enough, but seeing her exposed in front of everyone would be a different kind of storm. Still, he knew it was the only way. By evening, the sheriff's truck rolled down the street and stopped in front of Karen's house. 2 deputies stepped out alongside him. Word spread quickly and neighbors began to gather outside. Mrs. Miller stood on her porch, whispering with Mr. Lewis. A few others came out, curious about what was happening. Tom stood quietly near his fence, his notebook tucked under his arm. His chest tightened as he watched Karen step outside, clearly surprised to see the sheriff. She smoothed her neat outfit and forced a smile. "Good evening, Sheriff," she said, her voice calm but sharp underneath. "What seems to be the matter?" The sheriff kept his tone firm. "Karen, we've received a complaint about unauthorized use of electricity." "We're here to inspect," Karen laughed lightly. "Oh, surely there's some mistake. I pay all my bills on time. Who could accuse me of something so outrageous?" The sheriff's expression did not change. "We'll see soon enough. Please step aside while we take a look." Karen hesitated, but the presence of the deputies and the watching neighbors left her little choice. She stepped back as the sheriff and his men walked to the garage. Tom's heart pounded as they moved toward the exact spot he had shown in his pictures. The sheriff crouched near the bushes, pushed a few branches aside, and pointed. "Here it is. A live wire running straight from Tom's meter into your garage." Gasps spread through the small crowd. Mrs. Miller covered her mouth and Mr. Lewis muttered under his breath. Karen's face turned pale, but she quickly tried to recover. "That's not mine," she shouted. "Anyone could have put that there to frame me. This is harassment." But the sheriff shook his head. "The connection is fresh and it leads directly into your system. No one else could have set this up without entering your property. We have the proof we need." Karen's voice grew shrill. "You can't do this to me." "I have rights." The sheriff remained calm but firm. "And Tom has rights too. He has the right not to have his property stolen from. Tonight, this stops." With a nod, the deputies began disconnecting the line. Sparks flashed briefly as the wire was pulled free. Then one by one, the bright lights in Karen's house flickered and died. The fountain stopped, the garage lamps went dark, and the once glowing house stood in silence. The neighbors whispered among themselves. For years, Karen had acted like the one in control, but now her secret was exposed for everyone to see. Tom stood quietly, not gloating, only relieved. The sheriff turned to him and gave a nod. "It's handled, Tom. We'll file the report and she'll face fines for this theft. You did the right thing by coming forward." Tom tipped his hat in thanks. The weight on his shoulders finally began to lift. His ranch would no longer carry the burden of her greed. And as the sheriff's truck drove away, the once bright house stood in the dark, while Tom's ranch glowed with the honest light of his own hard work. The night after the sheriff disconnected the wire, the whole neighborhood felt different. For years, Karen's house had stood brighter and louder than the rest, always glowing as if it never slept. Now it looked ordinary, almost too quiet. The fountain no longer splashed, the garage lights no longer burned, and even the steady hum of machines was gone. For the first time, Karen's house blended into the street like every other home. Tom sat on his porch, his old dog lying at his feet. He stared at the dark house across the fence and thought about how quickly things had changed. Just one evening before, Karen had stood tall, denying every word. Now her secret was exposed for all to see. The sheriff had promised fines, maybe even more, and Tom knew she would not escape so easily. Still, he wondered how Karen would act now that the truth had been pulled out into the open. The next morning gave him the answer. Karen stepped outside in a crisp dress, her chin lifted high as if nothing had happened. She waved to Mrs. Miller, though Mrs. Miller only turned away. She greeted Mr. Lewis, but he shut his door without a word. The neighbors who had once listened to her with polite smiles were no longer fooled. They had seen the sheriff hold up the wire himself. They had watched the lights in her house flicker out when the deputies pulled the connection free. No one could deny what had happened. By noon, word had spread beyond their street. Folks in town were whispering about Karen's scheme. Shopkeepers shook their heads, and old men outside the cafe muttered about greed. Everyone admired Tom's patience. He had gathered proof, stayed calm, and gone through the law instead of letting anger take over. His actions gave others the courage to speak more freely about the way Karen had treated them in the past. That evening, the neighborhood gathered in the small park at the end of the road. It was not a formal meeting, but almost everyone came. They brought folding chairs, and children ran across the grass while the adults spoke in low voices. Tom sat quietly near the back, his hat resting on his knee. He had not asked for this gathering, but he could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to speak. At last, Mr. Lewis stood. His voice was rough but steady. "We've all seen what happened with Karen. Some of us suspected for years, but Tom was the only one who proved it. He did what many of us could not. He stood up to our lies and showed us the truth. I think we should thank him for that." Applause spread across the group. Tom shifted uncomfortably, not used to such attention, but he gave a small nod. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I just wanted what was fair. My ranch was struggling while her house glowed like a festival. It wasn't right, and I couldn't stay silent. Anyone in my shoes would have done the same." Mrs. Miller spoke next. Her voice carried a mixture of relief and sadness. "For years she made us believe she was better than the rest of us. She always spoke loudly, making herself look innocent and blaming others. I even doubted myself when she scolded me for watering my garden too much. But now I see she was the one wasting what belonged to someone else. I won't be fooled again," others nodded. Stories began to pour out. Small lies Karen had told. Times she had shifted blame, moments when she had made others feel small. One by one, the neighbors realized how much they had allowed her to control the street with her voice alone. Karen herself arrived halfway through the gathering. She marched into the park, her steps sharp, her eyes flashing with anger. She stood before the group and raised her hands as if to command silence. "You're all wrong about me," she declared. "That wire was planted. Someone wanted to frame me. Tom has been against me from the start. This is nothing but jealousy." But the crowd did not believe her. They had seen too much. Children whispered, adults frowned, and not a single person stepped forward to defend her. Even those who had once admired her confidence now kept their distance. Tom rose slowly, meeting her gaze without fear. "No one framed you, Karen. The sheriff found the wire. The deputies disconnected it, and everyone saw your lights go out. You can shout as much as you like, but the truth is out now. It cannot be hidden again." For the first time, Karen faltered. Her words stumbled. Her face turned red, and her voice lost its usual sharpness. She looked around the circle of neighbors and found only silence. No nods of support, no polite smiles, no one willing to take her side. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the park, her footsteps fading into the dark street. The group remained quiet for a moment, watching her leave. Then Mr. Lewis spoke again. "That's the end of her hold on us. She may still live here, but she no longer rules this street with her tongue. We've all seen her true face." The crowd slowly broke apart, people returning to their homes with lighter hearts. Children laughed louder, and adults smiled at one another as if a shadow had been lifted. Tom walked back to his ranch under the stars. For the first time in months, he felt peace. The wires were gone, his bills would return to normal, and his neighbors stood with him instead of against him. Karen might continue to shout, but her words no longer carried weight. As he reached his porch, Tom looked once more at her darkened house. He knew the fight was not completely over. There might be more twists ahead, more arguments, perhaps even more schemes. But tonight he had the truth, the law, and the respect of his community. That was enough. The days following the sheriff's visit brought a calm that the neighborhood had not felt in years. Without the steady glow of Karen's lights or the hum of her endless machines, the street looked peaceful at night. Families sat on porches again, children played outside until dusk, and neighbors spoke freely without fear of her sharp words. Tom noticed the difference most of all. His electricity bill dropped back to its normal amount, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He could now focus on his ranch instead of worrying about unfair costs. The horses seemed calmer, the barn lights looked brighter, and even his old dog wagged his tail more often. It was as if the ranch itself breathed easier. Karen, however, was not ready to accept defeat. In the first week after the sheriff disconnected her power, she marched from house to house demanding that neighbors hear her side. She claimed she had been framed, that Tom had tricked everyone and that the sheriff had made a mistake. But the people she spoke to listened in silence and then quietly closed their doors. No one argued, no one believed her story. The proof had been too clear and her words no longer carried weight. The sheriff returned a few days later with official papers. He posted them on Karen's door for everyone to see. The notice explained the fines she owed and the rules she had broken. It warned her that any attempt to reconnect the wires illegally would bring harsher punishment. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk to read it, shaking their heads. Karen stood inside, peering through the curtains, but she did not step out. Tom felt no joy in seeing her humiliated. He had never wanted revenge. All he had wanted was fairness, a chance to live in peace without being taken advantage of. Still, he could not ignore the quiet sense of justice that filled the air. For once, the truth had been stronger than her lies, and the law had stood by his side. One evening, Mrs. Miller and Mr. Lewis came to visit Tom at his ranch. They sat around a small fire pit in his yard while the stars shone overhead. Mrs. Miller brought a basket of bread, and Mr. Lewis brought fresh honey from his hives. As they ate, the conversation turned to what had happened. "You gave us courage," Mrs. Miller said softly. "For so long, we all kept quiet, afraid of her temper. But you showed us that silence only gives people like her more power. Because of you, we learned to stand together." Tom shook his head. "I only followed what was right. I could not let her keep stealing from me. It was not bravery, just necessity." But Mr. Lewis disagreed. "It was more than that. You faced her lies with patience. You chose proof instead of anger. That's a lesson we all needed." Their words humbled Tom. He realized then that his actions had carried more weight than he had imagined. It was not just about the electricity. It was about showing the neighborhood that even the loudest lies could not silence the quiet strength of truth. As the weeks passed, Karen's influence faded completely. Her once busy driveway grew empty, as fewer people visited her home. The HOA meetings she once controlled became calm discussions, where everyone had a voice instead of one person shouting. Decisions were made fairly, and neighbors worked together to improve their street. Children no longer hurried past her house. They laughed and played freely, no longer afraid of her sudden scolding. Parents waved to each other across yards, friendships grew stronger, and the community slowly healed from years of tension. One afternoon, Tom walked into town to buy supplies. As he entered the cafe, people turned to greet him. A few clapped him on the back, others offered him a seat, and the owner refused to take his money for coffee. "This one's on the house," the man said with a grin. Tom tried to protest, but the owner insisted. "You did something good for all of us. Let me do something small for you." Tom smiled quietly and accepted. He never thought standing up for himself would bring him respect from the whole town. But he understood why now. People admired honesty, patience, and fairness. In a world where lies could spread quickly, those qualities mattered more than ever. Karen remained on the street, but her days of control were over. She rarely left her house, and when she did, no one paid her much attention. Her once confident voice had lost its power, and she had become a shadow of her old self. On a cool autumn evening, Tom stood at his fence, watching the sun set across the wide fields. The sky glowed orange and gold, and the breeze carried the smell of cut hay. He thought about everything that had happened: the stolen electricity, the confrontation, the sheriff's arrival, the darkened house, and finally, the quiet peace that followed. He realized something important. Justice was not about punishing someone until they suffered. It was about restoring balance, about giving truth a chance to shine. Karen had chosen lies and tricks, and those choices had led her to where she was now. Tom had chosen patience and proof, and those choices had brought him peace. As the stars appeared above, Tom whispered a promise to himself. If trouble ever comes again, I'll face it the same way, with truth, with patience, and with the law by my side. His dog barked softly as if agreeing, and Tom smiled. The ranch lights flickered on, glowing steady and honest. Across the street, Karen's house remained dark, a reminder of the past. But in Tom's heart there was no bitterness, only calm. The neighborhood had learned, justice had spoken, and life on the ranch could finally move forward. And so, in the quiet of that evening, Tom knew that the battle was truly over. The truth had won and peace had returned, not just for him but for everyone around him.